There is a particular kind of silence that follows the moment a man realizes he has been completely and utterly fooled, not by a stranger, not by chance, but by someone he chose to trust with everything he had left to give. This is a story that arrived in the channel's inbox on a quiet Tuesday morning, sent by a man named Robert Callahan, 61 years old, a retired corporate attorney from Portland, Oregon. A man who had spent 4 decades dissecting the fine print of contracts, catching lies buried in legal language, and building a professional reputation on his ability to see through deception before it could take root. He began his message with a single sentence that stopped everything. "I need you to tell my story," he wrote, "because I was the last person on earth anyone would have expected this to happen to, including me." What Robert lost in the Philippines cannot be measured in dollars alone, though the financial damage was catastrophic. What this story is really about is something far more fragile. The thing that happens to a man when he finally, after a lifetime of emotional guardedness, allows himself to believe he is loved and discovers that every moment of that belief was engineered by someone else's hand. This is Robert Callahan's story, and it begins, like so many of these stories do, not with desperation, but with hope. Portland in the autumn of that year was the kind of city that makes retirement feel like a punishment. Robert Callahan had spent 40 years being indispensable. Senior partner at a contract law firm, the man clients called at 11 o'clock at night when a deal was unraveling, the man whose name on a document made the other side nervous. He had been sharp, precise, and relentlessly effective, and for 4 decades, that had been enough to fill whatever space existed inside him that might otherwise have been filled by something warmer. His first marriage had ended when his daughter was 3 years old. He barely spoke of it. His second marriage to a woman named Patricia, a landscape architect with enough patience to last 12 years, had collapsed 3 years before his retirement, quietly and without drama, the way things collapse when no one is paying attention. Patricia's parting words during the final mediation had embedded themselves somewhere he could not reach. "You have never once made me feel chosen, Robert. Not once in 12 years. He had not contested that. He had not known how to. Retirement, which he had imagined as freedom, arrived instead as a vast and featureless landscape with no deadlines in it. His son, Daniel, 31, living in Seattle, had drifted into estrangement gradually. The distance between them less the result of any single argument than of 1,000 small absences accumulated over 2 decades. Robert's calls went unanswered, more often than not. He told himself Daniel was busy. He told himself a lot of things. He kept himself occupied with the discipline of a man afraid of what stillness would reveal. Morning runs along the waterfront, books on Southeast Asian history, cooking elaborate dinners for himself that he ate standing at the kitchen counter. He had looked into retiring abroad, somewhere cheaper, somewhere warmer, somewhere with a different texture to the days, and had joined several expat Facebook groups to read other people's experiences. It was in one of those groups that everything began. The group was called Manila Expat Network, a community of retirees, digital nomads, and long-term foreign residents sharing advice about visas, neighborhoods, healthcare, and daily life. In the Philippine capital, Robert mostly lurked. He read threads about the cost of condominiums in BGC, about the best hospitals, about navigating bureaucracy. He was not looking for anything beyond information. He was not looking for anyone. He noticed Cristina Villanueva, the way you notice something that seems quietly out of place, not loudly, not urgently, but in a way that lingers. She had commented on someone's post about adjusting to Filipino culture, a warm and thoughtful response about patience and the importance of understanding family dynamics. Her profile photo showed a young woman in nursing scrubs, dark hair pulled back, the kind of smile that looked like it cost her nothing to give. Her account was full of photographs, hospital corridors, Sunday church visits, her mother's small kitchen in Cebu, family gatherings around modest tables loaded with food. Robert sent her a brief, polite message. He told himself it was simply a friendly inquiry about life in Manila from a local perspective. She replied 2 days later. She apologized for the delay. She had been on a night shift at the pediatric clinic where she worked. She wrote in careful, grammatically precise English with a warmth that felt entirely unperformed. She said she was happy to answer any questions he had about the city. They began to talk. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. What happened over the following 2 months was not a seduction in any dramatic sense. There were no bold declarations, no urgent confessions, no breathless late-night revelations. What Christina Villanueva built with Robert Callahan was constructed out of something far more durable than excitement. She built it out of consistency. Every morning, without fail, a voice message arrived on Robert's phone. Not a typed message, a voice message. The sound of her, before she began her shift, speaking to him in that measured and gentle way she had, asking about his day, sharing something small about hers. The ward had been busy. A child had been discharged after 3 weeks, and the mother had cried with relief. She had stopped at a bakery, and the woman behind the counter had reminded her of her late grandmother. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that accumulate into intimacy. Before a person realizes what is happening. She called him Robbie. No one in Robert's adult life had ever called him that. Not Patricia. Not his colleagues. Not even his mother in her later years. The name did something to him he would have struggled to articulate. It made him feel as though she was speaking to a version of him that had existed before the professional armor had been fitted, before the suits and the depositions and the decades of strategic emotional management. She asked about his legal career with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, not the polite curiosity of someone making conversation, but the focused interest of someone who wanted to understand how his mind worked. She asked what it felt like to read a contract and already know where the danger was buried. She asked whether he had ever defended someone he believed was lying. She asked what he had been most proud of in 40 years of practice. Robert found himself answering at length. He found himself sharing things, hesitations, regrets, the professional moments he was least proud of that he had never told Patricia, that he had never told anyone. Christina spoke often about her father, a fisherman from Cebu who had died when she was 19. A man she described as someone who had believed in honest work and never once asked for more than he was owed. She carried his photograph in her wallet. She visited his grave every year on his birthday and brought him his favorite biscuits because it had been his habit to eat them with his morning coffee. Robert was a man trained to evaluate testimony. He understood, at an intellectual level, that he could not verify any of this. But the detail of it, the biscuits, the birthday, the specific texture of grief she brought to it felt like the kind of thing that could not be fabricated. He told himself this. He believed it. By the end of the second month, they were speaking every day, without exception. Robert had reorganized his mornings around her messages. He had begun to think about Manila not as a destination to investigate, but as a place where someone was waiting. He had not yet sent her a single dollar. She had not asked for one. That, more than anything else, was what convinced him. It was in the 5th month of their correspondence that Christina Villanueva made the move that Robert Callahan, attorney at law, would later identify as the most sophisticated thing she did throughout the entire operation, though he would not recognize it as such until long after everything had collapsed. She tried to end it, not dramatically, not with a scene. She sent him a voice message on a Wednesday evening, her tone quieter than usual, measured in a way that felt effortful, as though she were working to keep herself composed. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said that she had developed feelings for him, real feelings, and that this frightened her. Because she was a practical woman, and she understood what the geography between them meant. She said she did not want to be the reason he built expectations around something that could not realistically become what both of them might want it to be. She said it would be better, probably, if they returned to being simply friendly acquaintances. She said this without anger, without accusation, without any demand, and that was precisely what made it devastating. There was nothing for Robert to push back against. There was no ultimatum to reject. There was only a woman, quietly, maturely, sadly withdrawing before she allowed herself to be hurt. Robert Callahan, who had not chased anything in his personal life in 30 years, found himself composing a response within 20 minutes. He told her she was wrong. He told her that the distance was a logistical problem, not an emotional one, and that logistical problems were the kind he had spent his entire career solving. He told her that what they had built over 5 months was not something he was willing to simply reclassify as a pleasant acquaintance. He booked a flight to Manila 4 days later. He told himself it was rational. He was considering retiring abroad anyway. He had been researching the Philippines. This was simply an opportunity to gather direct experience. He told himself all of this with the precision of a man constructing a legal argument And like the best legal arguments, it was technically coherent and fundamentally dishonest. He was going to Manila because Cristina Villanueva had made him feel, for the first time in decades, that walking away from something would be the mistake of his life. That sensation, the fear of loss rather than the pursuit of gain, was the most powerful instrument in the syndicate's toolkit, and it had been deployed on Robert Callahan with surgical precision. The city hit him like a physical thing, the heat first, thick and immediate the moment the airport doors opened. Then the noise, the density of traffic, the smell of street food and exhaust, and something floral he couldn't identify. Manila was not Portland. It was not anywhere he had been before. It was loud and chaotic and layered in a way that made him feel simultaneously overwhelmed and strangely alive. Cristina was waiting outside the terminal building. She was smaller than he'd imagined, petite, in a simple yellow dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was holding a handwritten sign with his name on it, slightly crooked, and when she saw him, her face broke into an expression that Robert would describe months later to the Expat Warning Forum as the most convincing thing he had ever witnessed in his life. It was not the smile of a woman performing happiness. It was, or appeared to be, the smile of someone who had been waiting for something and had begun, privately, to doubt it would arrive. She reached up and took his arm to guide him through the crowd. She was warm and unhurried. She said, "Welcome to Manila," as though she meant it personally. He stayed for 3 weeks. The days arranged themselves around her schedule. She was working, she reminded him, and could not simply disappear, but she organized her shifts to maximize their time together. She took him through Intramuros, the old walled city, explaining its history with the focused enthusiasm of a good teacher. She took him to a small family restaurant in Malate where the owners knew her name and the food was extraordinary and inexpensive. She took him to Quiapo Church on a Sunday morning where she lit a candle and stood quietly in prayer, and Robert stood beside her feeling something he could not name, a sense of being adjacent to something genuine. On the second week, she brought him to meet 2 cousins, young men, friendly and slightly deferential in that way he had read. Filipinos often were with older foreign visitors. They shared a meal, spoke about basketball and local politics, and seemed thoroughly uninterested in Robert's financial situation. He noted this approvingly. On the 3rd week, she took him to Cebu for 4 days. Her mother, a small, deeply warm woman in her 60s who spoke almost no English, fed him relentlessly and touched his hand whenever she passed him, and looked at Cristina with an expression of uncomplicated approval. Robert sat in that small house watching a ceiling fan move the humid air and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He left Manila without making any declarations. He was a careful man. But on the flight back to Portland, crossing the Pacific in the dark, he allowed himself to think about what the rest of his life might look like, and for the first time in 3 years, the image had someone in it. He was back in Portland for 11 days before the first request arrived. It did not come from Cristina. This was important. He would reflect on this later, would understand it as deliberate. It never came from Cristina directly. It arrived sideways, embedded in concern. She called him on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying that particular quality of someone trying to sound composed while not quite managing it. Her younger brother, she explained, was enrolled in a vocational program, electrical engineering, and the semester fees were due. Their mother had been counting on a payment from a relative that had not materialized. She was not asking Robert for anything. She wanted to be clear about that she was simply sharing, because she shared things with him now, because that was what they were to each other. Robert asked how much was needed. She told him, $800. He transferred it the same day. Christina's response was immediate and mortified. She said it was too much, that she would pay him back, that she had not meant for this to become his problem. He told her firmly that it was not a problem. He told her he was glad he could help. This exchange established something crucial. It established that Robert would respond to her distress with financial action. It established that her reluctance made him more likely to give, not less. And it established a template that would be repeated, with careful variation, over the following months, each crisis arriving at a different angle, each amount calibrated to feel significant but not alarming, each of Christina's responses performing the same reluctant, grateful, faintly ashamed gratitude that made Robert feel not like a man being extracted, but like a man making a difference. Her mother's hospital admission came 6 weeks later, a kidney infection, serious enough to require IV treatment, not serious enough to be life-threatening. The bill came to $1,400. Robert paid it without hesitation. He asked for updates. She sent him photographs of her mother in a hospital bed, looking tired but grateful, holding a small bunch of flowers someone had brought. 3 weeks after that, a typhoon clipped the northern coast of Cebu and damaged the roof of the family home. Repairs were urgent. The rainy season was coming. $2,000. Robert transferred it the same afternoon, he heard. By the time he relocated to Manila 7 months after his first visit, he had sent a total of $18,400 across these various emergencies. He had not kept a careful accounting this. For a contract lawyer who tracked billing in 6-minute increments, should have been a warning sign of its own. But he had stopped tracking because the amounts had felt, individually, entirely reasonable. And because tracking them would have meant looking at the total, and looking at the total might have prompted questions he did not want to ask, he told himself he had done his due diligence. He had looked at her social media. He had spent 3 weeks in her company. He had met her family. He had a lawyer's eye for deception, and it had not been triggered. What he did not know, could not have known, was that every element he had evaluated had been curated for his evaluation. The social media account had been built over years for exactly this purpose. The cousins were syndicate members. The woman in the Cebu hospital bed was paid. The mother he had sat beside in that small house, under the ceiling fan, was a woman named Amelita who did this work twice a month and was very good at it. His lawyer's eye had been given a case with no flaws in the evidence because every piece of evidence had been manufactured. He arrived in Manila on a Thursday morning in the month of October with 4 suitcases and a storage unit back in Portland, and a sense of purpose he had not felt since he had last walked out of a courthouse having won something difficult. Christina had found the condominium in BGC Bonifacio Global City, the gleaming, orderly district in the south of Manila that felt, in certain lights, almost like a version of somewhere American. The building was modern. The unit was clean and well furnished. The view took in a slice of the city skyline. The lease was for 1 year. Paid up front at Robert's insistence, he had negotiated better terms, he told himself. Because he knew how to negotiate, he transferred $22,000 for the year. Life in Manila with Christina had a rhythm that felt, on its surface, like the life he had imagined. She came to the condo 3 or 4 evenings each week, always with a credible account of her time during the others' night shifts. Family dinners in Cebu she had made the journey for. A colleague's birthday she had felt obligated to attend. She cooked for him on the evenings she stayed. Filipino dishes adobo, sinigang, kare-kare that she assembled in his kitchen with the practiced ease of someone who had been cooking since childhood. She asked about his day. She listened to his answers. He settled into the city with more ease than he had expected. He found a cafe near the condo where the owner recognized him after the 3rd visit. He walked the parks in the early morning before the heat arrived. He began to feel, cautiously and with the self-awareness of a man who had been disappointed before, that this was working. He saw the limitations, of course he did. She was 30 years younger than him. Their life in Manila was not quite the shared domesticity he had envisioned. They were not yet living together in any full sense. But he told himself these were transitional circumstances. He told himself they were building towards something. What he did not allow himself to examine too carefully was the texture of her absence on the nights she was not there. The way her phone was sometimes unavailable for hours at a stretch during those nights. The slight inconsistencies in her accounts of how she had spent her time, small things, the kind of things a contract lawyer would ordinarily flag, but which he filed away without examination, because examining them would have meant confronting a possibility he had structured his entire recent life around refusing to entertain. He was 61 years old. He had sold his share of the practice. He had left Portland. There was no version of Robert Callahan being wrong about this that he was willing to construct. The dinner was Christina's idea, though she presented it as Ferdinand's. A friend of her uncle, she explained. A businessman who had been working in real estate development for 20 years and who happened to be looking for foreign investors for a pre-selling project in Cavite, residential development south of Manila, high-growth area, strong projected returns. Ferdinand had heard there was an American in Christina's life and had asked, through her, whether Robert might be interested in meeting for dinner simply to hear about the opportunity. No obligation, she emphasized. Ferdinand was not the type to push. Robert agreed. He was, in a mild and non-urgent way, thinking about what to do with his capital. He had liquid assets sitting in Portland accounts, generating modest returns. A real estate investment in a developing market, approached correctly and with appropriate legal scrutiny, was not inherently unreasonable. Ferdinand arrived at the restaurant in Makati, looking exactly as the situation required him to look. Well-dressed without being flashy, a smartphone with a cracked screen, a detail Robert would later recognize as deliberate. It signaled a man too busy to replace a phone, too unbothered by appearances to be vain. A business card that looked professionally printed. He spoke about the Cavite project with the measured enthusiasm of someone who had given this presentation many times and did not need to oversell it. He had documents. Not just summaries, actual documents, detailed and formatted, with project maps and financial projections, and what appeared to be developer registration paperwork. Robert examined them across the dinner table with the focused attention of a man who had spent 40 years reading documents for a living. He found nothing obviously wrong. He asked pointed questions. Ferdinand answered each one without hesitation and with appropriate detail. Christina sat beside Robert throughout, mostly quiet, occasionally translating a technical term into Tagalog for Ferdinand. Before he provided the English answer, a small performance of authenticity that registered only as helpfulness. Robert told Ferdinand he would think about it. He spent 4 days researching the Cavite real estate market online. He found the general area matched the demographic and development claims Ferdinand had made. The project name appeared in a minor online business listing, later found to be fabricated, that seemed to confirm its existence. He called a contact at a Manila law firm he had been referred to by an expat forum, not realizing this referral had been seeded by the same network, and requested a preliminary review of the documents. The contact expressed no concerns. Robert began with a small amount, $50,000, which he transferred to a local corporate account whose details Ferdinand provided. 3 weeks later, a payment of $6,000 arrived in the local bank account that Christina had helped him open shortly after his arrival, framed as an early-stage investor return, ahead of schedule, a gesture of good faith from the developer. The $6,000 was real. It was in his account. He could see it. That single deposit was the hinge upon which everything turned. He transferred the remainder 3 weeks after the initial return was deposited. $310,000, transferred in 2 tranches to the same corporate account. Robert had structured it himself, the way he would have structured any significant investment he felt during the process. The particular satisfaction of a man applying professional expertise to his personal life. He was not being naive. He was being methodical. He had reviewed the documents. He had received a return. He had done more due diligence than most retail investors would have thought to do. Ferdinand sent a formal acknowledgement of receipt. He spoke with warmth and gratitude about Robert's confidence in the project. He said the development timeline would mean the first major return would arrive within 90 days. For the next 3 weeks, everything continued as normal. Christina came to the condo on her usual evenings. Ferdinand responded to messages within a day. The documentation was in order. Robert felt the particular calm of a man who has made a considered decision and is at peace with it. Then Ferdinand stopped answering his phone. It happened gradually, in the way these things do when they are designed to give a person just enough ambiguity to avoid immediate alarm. First a missed call, then a message that arrived 24 hours late and was slightly vague in its content. Then 2 days of silence, then a message saying there had been a regulatory issue with the documentation that was being resolved, then nothing at all. Robert called Christina to tell her he was having difficulty reaching Ferdinand. Her response was immediate and appeared entirely genuine. She called her uncle, she said. She would find out what was happening. She would get answers. She arrived at the condo the following evening, looking devastated. The color was wrong in her face. She sat across from Robert and told him, with what appeared to be the specific misery of someone who has discovered they have accidentally caused harm to someone they love, that she had reached her uncle and that something was very wrong with the development project. Ferdinand had apparently disappeared. There were other investors. It was possible, she could barely say it, that the project had not been legitimate. Robert watched her face while she told him this. He watched it with 40 years of professional skepticism and with 12 months of accumulated emotional investment and with $310,000 suspended in the background of the conversation, and he could not decide which of those things to trust. He chose to comfort her. He put his arm around her shoulders. He told her it was not her fault. That night, after she left, he sat alone in the BGC condo for a long time without turning on the lights. She did not come back the next evening. She sent a message. She was sorry. She needed a little time. She felt so guilty. She could not face him, knowing what had happened. He told her there was nothing to face. He told her he did not blame her. He told her to come whenever she was ready. She sent a shorter message the following day, and a shorter one the day after that. And then, on the fourth day, no message at all. Robert called. The call connected but went unanswered. He called again and again. He wrote messages that were delivered, the delivery receipts were there, the blue ticks, and not responded to. On the sixth day of silence, the messages stopped delivering. He went to the number she had given him for her mother in Cebu. A woman answered in Tagalog who seemed confused by his questions and passed the phone to a younger voice who spoke some English and said there was no Christina at this number. He took a taxi to the address in Parañaque that she had given him as her home during the early months of their correspondence, an address he had never had reason to visit because she had always been the one to come to BGC. He stood outside a small residential building in the early afternoon heat and knocked on the door of the unit number she had given him, and the woman who answered had never heard the name Cristina Villanueva. He went to the pediatric clinic she had named as her workplace. He showed the front desk her photograph on his phone. The woman at the desk studied it carefully and said she did not recognize the face and that no one by that name was employed there. He returned to the condo and sat down on the floor because the chair seemed too far away. $364,600. Gone. The condo lease had been signed and paid. The bank account held a balance of $3,000. The investment account held nothing recoverable. The woman he had organized his life around did not appear to exist in any location he could physically reach. He had left Portland for this. He had left his practice, his city, the estranged relationship with his son that he might still have found his way back to if he had stayed still long enough. He had brought his capital, his retirement, his remaining faith in his own judgment, and he had handed all of it to someone who had been reading from a script. He sat on the floor of the BGC condo for a very long time. Outside the windows, Manila continued in its relentless way, indifferent and enormous. A city of 14 million people in which one woman had simply ceased to exist. The Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group was professional and thorough and ultimately helpless. The corporate account into which Robert had transferred his money had been opened with false documentation and emptied within hours of each transfer. The condo building's CCTV footage showed Cristina, or the woman who had called herself Cristina, but the footage was insufficient to yield a useful identification. The address in Parañaque was a dead end. The man called Ferdinand had used a name that matched no registered business individual the police could locate. The U.S. Embassy assisted with the practical dimensions of Robert's situation documentation, a notarized statement, a list of legal resources. The consul who met with him was kind and careful and had clearly done this meeting before. Robert spent 6 weeks in Manila after the discovery. He filed every report available to him. He hired a local attorney, a real one, this time located through a verified bar association referral, and was told, with measured honesty, that the likelihood of financial recovery was extremely low and the likelihood of criminal prosecution even lower. 8 Nora's operation, as it was later described to Robert through expat forum channels, had almost certainly relocated within days of the collapse. These syndicates moved quickly. They had done this before. He flew back to Portland on a gray January morning, carrying less than he had arrived with in every sense that mattered. His son Daniel called 3 days after he landed. He had seen a post Robert had contributed to on an expat warning forum, the one interview Robert gave, the single public statement he had allowed himself. Daniel's message was brief. It said, "Dad, I'm in Portland next week. Can we have dinner?" Robert stared at that message for a long time before he answered. They had dinner at a restaurant near Robert's apartment. He had given up the Portland house in the optimism of the relocation and was renting a furnished apartment downtown, smaller than anything he had lived in since law school. Daniel was 32 now, more settled than Robert remembered him. They sat across from each other, and Robert told him what had happened, all of it, without the legal framing and without the self-protective instinct that had always, before, shaped what he allowed his son to see. Daniel listened without interruption. When Robert finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry that happened, and I'm sorry I wasn't around." Robert had not cried in front of another person since his own father's funeral, 23 years earlier. He came close that evening in the restaurant. He managed, just barely, to hold it together, old habits, old armor, but something shifted in that conversation that had not shifted in a very long time. He began therapy in February. His therapist, a woman who specialized in fraud recovery and financial trauma, explained to him the specific psychological mechanisms that had been used against him, the manufactured reluctance, the engineered sense of being the pursuer rather than the pursued, the calibrated escalation of financial requests, the way the final investment had been preceded by a real deposit to dissolve the last of his skepticism. She helped him understand that the sophistication of the operation was not a reflection of his failure, but of its professionalism. He heard this. He understood it intellectually. The shame was slower to release than the understanding. He gave one interview to the Expat Forum and one interview only, and in it he said the thing that has since been shared thousands of times in online fraud awareness communities. "I spent 40 years believing I could read people. I was wrong about the one thing that mattered. He has not returned to the Philippines." The woman who called herself Cristina Villanueva, her real name, her real province, her real face, was never confirmed. Somewhere in Manila or Cebu or Pasay City or any of the other places a person can disappear into when a city is large enough, she continued her life. Whether she thought about Robert Callahan is unknown. Whether the line between performance and feeling had ever, in her case, blurred as genuinely as she appeared capable of that, too, is unknown. What is known is that 8 Nor's operation relocated and resumed. That somewhere, in another country, another man was receiving a warm voice message from someone who had found him through an online expat group, someone who called him by a name no one else used, someone whose father had believed in honest work and whose family needed help and whose feelings for this particular man had arrived, she said. As a surprise, she had tried to resist. The pattern does not end. It only moves. Robert Callahan is 63 years old now. He practices what he describes as a reduced and restructured version of legal consulting contract reviews for small businesses, occasional mediation work, enough to keep his mind engaged, without the pressure of the partnership years. He lives modestly in a 1-bedroom apartment in Portland. He is in regular contact with his son. He is not the man he was at 61, and he is not the man he was at 40, and he has arrived, slowly and with considerable difficulty, at a position somewhere between those two versions of himself, less certain, less armored, more honest about what he does not know. He contributed his case details to an international fraud research initiative, studying romance scam operations in Southeast Asia. He moderates, occasionally, an online support forum for fraud victims. He reads the messages that come in from men in their 50s and 60s who are 3 months into a relationship with a woman they met in an expat group and have just been asked for a modest amount of money for a family emergency, and he writes back to each of them, carefully and without judgment, because he knows exactly where they are standing, and he knows what the view looks like from there. His message is never complicated. It does not need to be. He says, "The sophistication of what was done to you is not a measure of your weakness. It is a measure of theirs. The only question that matters now is what you do with what you know." Robert Callahan lost $364,600. He lost 14 months in Manila and a retirement he had planned with care. He lost, for a period, the possibility of his son. He did not lose everything, but it took him a long time to understand that the things he had not lost were worth more than the things he had. If you are watching this and something in this story feels familiar, if there is someone in your life right now who exists only through a screen, who has never asked for money directly but whose crises seem to require your financial intervention, whose feelings for you arrived at exactly the moment you most needed to feel chosen, please stop. Please tell someone in your real life what is happening. Please let someone who can see your face help you see what you may not be able to see alone. Real love does not need you to be isolated. Real love does not manufacture urgency. Real love does not disappear the morning after $310,000 clears a wire transfer. Robert Callahan learned this. The cost of that education was one he will carry for the rest of his life. You do not have to pay it. If this story moved you, If it made you think of someone you know or something you have seen, share it. Leave a comment. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this one, stories that most people are too ashamed to tell, please subscribe. These stories exist so that the next person standing where Robert stood might have one more reason to stop and ask the question he never asked himself in time. Thank you for watching.